And the second session, which I have the great pleasure to moderate, will be looking more at the managerial context of CSR and corporate impact assessment. So we have three distinguished members of the panel who are going to offer us their insights. I'm very pleased to be joined on the stage by Petteri Alinikula. My apologies for the Finnish pronunciation. Petteri is the head of product sustainability at Nokia. It's also one of the case study companies in work package 3 of the project. By Michel Bond, the senior vice president for sustainable development at Solvay company, and also chair of the ABIS business board. And third, but by no means least, Hans-Ulrich Beck, the head of global research products at Sustainalytics. So, as with the previous session, a few opening remarks, and then also a few questions or storylines, which we will use to structure the conversation with the panel, and I hope provoke some responses and some comments from the floor. So what can we draw as some of the main issues in a managerial context from the impact project? I think it's possible to boil them down to a few. These would not necessarily be in order of priority, but here are 4 that we picked out with the steering team to discuss this afternoon. The first is perhaps more conceptual. It is around the social contract for business in Europe, which in the past 10 to 15 years has been broadly defined by a retreat by government from markets, a voluntary approach to social, environmental, and governance issues for multinational companies in particular, and in exchange, relatively light touch regulation on corporate activities in these areas. And so we have, if you like, a situation where corporate social responsibility has become a policy instrument and a concept which has been accepted as the way that companies channel their responses, their voluntary responses to ESG issues into concrete activities and programs as a way to contribute to the broader societal development of Europe. But the second headline or issue is that the research which we've conducted over the past 3 years in this project suggests that if aggregated, corporate CSR activities and programs, as viewed through this more traditional lens, have not made a significant impact to achieving the broader goals for Europe, in particular those set by European public policy. And as such, we have to ask what kind of impacts are companies really managing, and what does it really contribute? As Jeremy said in the previous session, does CSR really matter? If we accept that business is a vital contributor to achieving the key principles of the Lisbon and the Gothenburg agendas of the last decade. So we are therefore shifting more into this debate about managing impacts and the relevance of impacts within the managerial context, the context of organizational decision-making in companies, the setting of strategy, the design of management systems, and of course the skills and competencies required within firms to approach impact and embed it in the way that they run their daily operations. So a third finding against this backdrop of the encouragement of business to think in terms of impact is that impact-type thinking, based on the evidence from the study, is relatively poorly developed in business, except in relation to economic outcomes for the firm. And within this context, CSR impacts are no different from other areas of business practice when it comes to this gap in terms of reflecting on, applying a logic to, and designing systems and tools to try and measure impact. And so a fourth issue or statement is the following. In the absence of a widely developed impact logic among companies and managers, and no accepted impact measurement methodologies, the societal impacts of companies remain unclear and hidden from public scrutiny and policy. So these are quite provocative statements, I think, and I will be very keen to hear the thoughts and responses from the panel on this, and of course from the floor. I think it's also very important to realize that these statements are not accusations or criticisms. They are simply observations. And so I hope it is very clear that through the study we've conducted in the last 3 years, this is not a business bashing session. This is not a series of analyses that accuse companies of not doing enough. It is intended to provoke a debate about how we can move forward with impacts at the heart of the way that businesses think and act on their responsibilities in society. Now, part of the tasks that we set ourselves in the Impact Project were to look at some of the methodologies and tools and approaches, and possibly develop new methodologies that could advise and inform companies about how to approach the complex, non-linear, difficult and hard exercise of attempting to measure their impacts. Now, the following slide is another framework. I'm not going to dwell too much on this because I don't want it to be the focus, the granular focus of this afternoon's conversation. I would refer you to the executive summary, which has a far more detailed elaboration of what we have generated as a team in Impact. It's a 10-step process that we think may help companies to design, to reflect on and design processes to identify and assess impacts, and also to manage the process of doing so going forward. The 5 key components of this, which you may or may not be able to read on the screen, are screening, strategy, implementation, tracking effects, and reporting and evaluation. Now, for those of you with a long experience of either working with business or within business, this may seem like a pretty standard quality assurance system or a management system. And in some ways it is. It's deliberately designed to reflect things which are known and recognized within companies. The twist on this is, of course, impacts. And within that, I refer you to the executive summary and some of the reflections on impact pathways and impact thinking. How to try to understand within complex systems, within rather oblique, non-causal relationships, where the real impacts most material to companies' business do lie. And I hope that we'll have a chance to discuss this perhaps tomorrow afternoon in terms of future priorities and the round tables on new approaches to corporate impact assessment. But I want to draw this to your attention so that you actually look in the executive summary and familiarize yourself with this as a proposed methodology to consider going forward. But against this backdrop, I formulated 5 key questions which I'm going to put to our panel and invite them one by one question by one question, to offer some thoughts and insights. So the first question is the following: what does society expect from business through the eyes of corporate management in terms of responsibility and positive impact? I think we don't necessarily have a clear understanding of what that is, and I think it's important to see how business perceives this as they go through the highly pressured reality of managing the company on a day-to-day basis. The second question is, if, based on our evidence, we accept that corporate CSR activities have not made a significant contribution to broader European Union goals in the past 10 to 15 years, do we need to reframe the entire concept of responsibility in business practice? And this, I think, brings us back to the question of the relevance of impacts to the responsibility and accountability of firms in society. The third tests that previous statement about the relatively poorly developed approaches to impact assessment in companies. And so I'm going to ask the panel for their perspectives on whether they think this is true, any counterfactuals and evidence that they might want to offer. And also, in this context, many companies do impact assessment. How do you do impact assessment for society, and also around corporate responsibility. So the fourth is what will incentivize companies to embrace an impact-focused approach, such as our 10-step model on CM, over the next 10 years. And last but not least, how important are the roles of other actors, networks, partnership ratings agencies, and reporting organizations, investors and asset owners, to advancing a culture of impact assessment in business. So, with that, I shall take my place on the stage. And I shall turn first to Petteri, and the first question to you, sir. What do you think society expects from business in terms of positive impacts and responsibility, more broadly and in the context of your role at Nokia?
Okay. Yes, in my simple mind, it goes like this: that when a company does a profitable business in certain society, that there's a kind of expectation that a fair amount of profit generated there would then be brought back to that society, and that can happen in many ways, and I feel that this type of specific CSR projects are just one means of bringing that back, and even more important are probably tax paying and then investments to that society. And I think that this CSR activities, projects come very important if there's no capability to invest to that country, start a unit there or something like that, which is regularly asked from a company like Nokia, which is operating in globally and have a lot of activities in emerging countries, for example.
Michel, how would you respond to question number one from a Solvay perspective?
So, could I say for me, the society is hoping that the business will create a balanced added value for the different capitals in the end of business. The answer is a little bit what is said by the integrated reporting approach, of course, but I think that it's important to have also for the natural capital, the social capital and the financial capital to have an added value. But how to have an added value? I think that what is important is to bring solution for the society, so to create products, and solution, of course, could be services for certain companies. And till this moment, as I was discussing just before, I think that we didn't discuss the impact of our products, and we discussed the impact of our cooperation, and I think that it would be important. But I will come back on that.
Thank you very much. Okay, Hans-Ulrich, we have a slightly different hats through Sustainalytics, but what do you perceive in terms of expectations from society on companies today?
I think maybe first to say that I don't think expectations are static. I think if you look at the developments over the last 20, 30 years, I'd say overall expectations from society have been increasing as to what they expect from corporations. I'd say in general terms I would identify maybe three main expectations. One is that we expect corporations to provide an added value to society, and so on balance corporations should contribute to a more sustainable society that is looking both at products, at jobs they offer, but also at other impacts. And clearly it is, in my view, probably not accepted that corporations generate benefits for some party at the expense of others, so that there's a net negative. I think there's also increasing expectation that corporations operate within a broader context of basic international norms, so that they respect certain minimum norms, so irrespective of overall positive impacts they might have, that they respect human rights, certain basic labor rights, etc. What these basic norms are, I think, differ across maybe regions, countries, but I think there's some, we see more and more, let's say, alignment that, or acceptance of this notion. I think there is also more expectations in terms of transparency, to be accountable on what the company is doing, what impacts you are having, and to be transparent and be transparent about what you do, even if not all parties might like it, at least be transparent and be open for a debate on this. Thank you.
Well, in line with that, I'll come back to a comment from Bruce Haas in the previous session. It says that companies either find it difficult to talk about negative impacts, or find it problematic, or prefer not to. So I'm just wondering, when we talk about positive impacts, it obviously generates a certain kind of debate, but how do we perhaps shift the culture in business so that companies are more comfortable talking about potential negative impacts? Would that change the way that you think you are perceived by key stakeholders in society? Who would like to take that first? Michel?
So I think that to increase our credibility, we have to explain what is going wrong. But we have to be aware that if you are the first in your sector, remember the TNT approach, they were the first to announce the fatalities, and their shares dropped. Why? Because the other, they didn't say that. So the investors were convinced that in other logistic company, of course, no fatalities. So imagine, remember when PepsiCo announced that they will change because sugar is too important and so on, and they have to reduce sugar and so on. And the share dropped, it was not accepted by, and so on. After that, of course, the gap was filled. But you have to be aware that, yes, we have to announce the problem we are facing, the difficulties and things like that, but it's not easy, and we have to increase a little bit the understandings by the different stakeholders, and not to be considered as the bad guy. So I think that it's a win-win situation, but we have to build that. Not easy.
Hans-Ulrich or Petteri, any thoughts?
Maybe two things to add. So I think one, to echo what my co-panelist said. I think we provide a framework that avoids, let's say, that promotes companies moving ahead by either having sectoral standards or certain pushing for certain norms of metrics, so that a company is not isolated by being transparent and criticized for that, but that you move more in step with an industry, and somehow promoting a certain more industry-wide approach, I think can address some of these obstacles. I think it's also a lot about how you communicate about this. So I think it is just providing figures and is probably not enough. It is important of presenting this in the broader context of a company's strategies. I think there are certainly a number of examples where companies have addressed certain negatives head-on as part of a way to explain, well, what they're doing about this, rather than staying silent. So I think there are examples. So I see it as an obstacle, but there are, I think, ways to address some of these obstacles.
Yeah, I would second that the communication is the key, and it's extremely difficult that the numbers, how many tons of CO2 emission for the public, they do not make sense. That somehow finding some kind of balance in telling the story about the positive and the negative parts and relative to each other, and I think that at least Nokia is in good business in that sense, that it's very easy to isolate that it's a hardware business, it has the environmental impact with the products, and then it's also a enabler of everyday kind of applications that you are able to help your life. So it's relatively easy tell that story, and I guess that in many other businesses it might be more difficult, but we struggle with that as well.
So is there a magic wand, or is this simply a process that takes a lot of time and requires a lot of buy-in from the organization to move the agenda forward?
At least we haven't found that yet, that magic wand.
Okay.
Still searching.
Still searching. Well, we wish you a great deal of good fortune in that search. Let's move on to the second question then, and perhaps a slightly more challenging question about the, if you like, the future of CSR, the past and the future of CSR. Do we need a new social contract for business? Are impacts, focusing on impacts, the way to reposition the way that companies respond to the expectations of society or public policy objectives? Hans-Ulrich, I also pick up on your comments about industry standards. Right? You know, I think if we look at what's happened in the chemical sector with REACH, and also in individual companies such as IBM with Smarter Planet or Unilever with Sustainable Living Plan, it seems that CSR is not really a driver for this. It's either a more strategic decision or it can be a collective move to raise standards within an industry sector. So your thoughts on this? Where do we go with CSR? Are we looking at a new social contract for business around impacts and a new definition of responsibility? Would you like to start?
I'm happy to start. I think maybe on the first one, on the redefinition of CSR or focusing CSR on impact, we would generally support that notion. I think as a background in our company, we have been reflecting also on how do we measure companies that we assess from an environmental, social, and governance perspective, and what to focus on. And we think impact is something very central to this. So that idea, I think, we would support and is in line with our thinking. The question is also, well, what does it exactly mean? And also, how do you promote an uptake of this idea? And I think it is something where, I think it was mentioned also in the earlier panel, I think we need to bring CSR then closer to the core of the company. So in the end, we must ask, well, if there is no uptake, why is there no uptake? And ultimately, it doesn't seem to be in the interest of companies to take this up, or not their priority. And I think there are many aspects around this that, well, how can we promote it? It's about, well, having agreement on, well, maybe what to promote, as a consensus on, say, the impact concept, how to measure it, have some standardization on how you report on it. But in the end, I think you need to make it also, let's say, of interest for companies to do something about this. And so there's also an aspect of broader public policy. How do you make the say, responsible behavior the right behavior? And unless I think you address this at the core, I think CSR will always be kind of a side game that everybody wonders when will it be taken up. So I do think there's also a need to look at, let's say, a broader policy context in which companies operate and ensure that this is ultimately promoting the concept of CSR.
So, Terry or Michelle, any thoughts on our second point?
Full of doubt. I think that, as I told you a few minutes ago, we need to study the product and maybe to have a special general code of conduct in terms of product. But the second level, and certainly for the chemical sector, I'm sorry, I'm speaking for my sector, the problem is the plant. But when you discuss with the local community, and I discuss from time to time with local communities, they are not interested by the consolidated result of our company. They are interested by the local impact. I remember a discussion I had with an authority in France, and they say, I am not interested by your greenhouse gas emission. It's not toxic, but I am interested by the investment you will realize in the next year concerning the noise. Of course, we are not presenting consolidated noise index. Maybe it's a mistake, but it's not in our mind, it's not in the list of our consolidated indicators that we have in our sustainable report. So, at the corporate level, what does that mean? With whom do I sign a social or societal contract? I am in Belgium. We have plants nearly everywhere in the world. I am exaggerating, but for instance, in Russia, we have a plant, a very large one. We have today another with many problems in Egypt. What kind of contract do I sign? Define a little bit better. I think that we have to begin by discussing, could I say, is it the product, and also the perimeter? Is it the financial perimeter? Is it the operational one? And I think that when I see the SIAM, really, I am interested by the tool, but when I see the SIAM, we need a zero level. And zero is to define, is it the product? And for which perimeter are we working? And there, I am able to show you societal impact of our products, societal impact of our plant. Of course, it's difficult to consolidate. And how to consider a plan with 50 guys and a plan with 3,000. Or, as I discussed, if you know a little bit Germany, there is a very, very large former Höchst plant not far from Frankfurt. I don't know how many companies are there. We are one of this company. What is the societal impact? Of course, is the societal impact of all this chemical division operating on this plant. So you see, we have all the time to define and to increase the granulometry of our analysis, I think. So that's a little bit my doubt.
So in that case, let's jump on 2 points, possibly points 3 and 4, overlapping. But this raises the question of what companies currently do with regard to impact assessment, both in terms of decision making, but also in more operational context in terms of management systems and tools that are currently in place. I mean, Petteri, what do you see in Nokia? Is impact part of the internal dialogue, or is it more perhaps sort of footprints or systems performance? How does it feature?
Okay, it's kind of mixed in that sense that maybe again that this mobile technology has been quite special in a special role in that sense that at one point when there was a huge growth of the mobile technology globally, there was a very clear linear relationship of the societal good by getting more wireless communication technology. So it was a very easy parameter to look at the phone penetration in country and see that, okay, it's good for that country, and even people were publishing some kind of gross national product growth percentages based on the direct relationship with the phone penetration. But maybe that was maybe we were too satisfied with that kind of simple analysis and didn't look deeper than that. In the environmental side, there's a lot of methodology, and this type of environmental impact of the product is something that is understood across the company. That's something that is one direction of development that should be continuously reduced, that we are expected by the customers and different stakeholders to do that. There are some methodologies, still a lot to do, that you are not able to compare products between different companies with those methodologies. Also, it's somehow too wild area that all the companies have so different methodologies and all the customers have so different methodologies that it's loading companies actually to analyze and fill the Excel sheets of different customers of what are the environmental parameters of our products. So some kind of standardization would, even if it's not perfect, would be really beneficial also in that area. And then coming to the social impacts, looking at activities in let's say education or health that we might be involved, that's completely in the infancy still, that we can do case studies of did the learning improve in certain area when we had a project, but somehow be able to put that into a wider context, that what was really the impact, that's still missing. And as it is missing, are we able to really prioritize our small efforts to the right high impact areas, which is definitely something that we want to do, and we have a strategy going forward in that. But the methodology is not perfect.
Well, we'll have to invite you to keep working with us to figure out what these methodologies look like. Hans-Ulrich, does this statement resonate with you? Mindsets and methods for assessing impacts for society, poorly developed and largely absent. I mean, is that what you see from Sustainalytics?
I'd say probably yes. So I think there are different sides to this. I mean, I think if I look at how at company reporting and on this issue, I wouldn't think that, let's say, impact is at the core of their thinking. So I think it's typically more around risks, say reputation, operational risks, maybe opportunities. So I think the framing is a bit different, even though, I mean, it also does speak to impact, but I wouldn't say that it's, let's say, the center of their thinking. If I think about the reporting frameworks that are being used, I would also not think that impact is at the center. If you look at GRI, some work done by SASB, maybe CDP is a bit more around impact. So I wouldn't say that impact is absent. I think it is at part, I think, more present and becoming more present, but I wouldn't say that it's the center. And I think there's certainly also discussion about, let's say, impact on whom. So it's often centered around impact on companies rather than the impact that companies have on society, as I think impact is being defined here. Maybe a final comment, if I look at our client base, so investors and asset managers, asset owners, there I think impact is being discussed more and more, because there is a bigger question about, well, you are investing in a responsible manner, what difference does it make? And so I think the question is being raised about, well, why are you doing this? What is the difference? Show us the difference. And so I think it is becoming more to the forefront, but I wouldn't say that at this moment it's at the center of people's mindset.
Thank you. I think that's a good segue into perhaps a slightly rephrased version of the final question. If we assume that impacts are attractive, feasible, manageable for business, this is a good way forward in managing responsibility, what will be the key drivers? Will it be investors demanding it? Will it be internal agencies within the firm? Will it be suppliers? Will it be the company taking leadership itself? I mean, how do you see this field moving forward in the next few years? And what would it take to really get impact embedded in the decision-making culture, the executive culture inside companies, your own and more broadly? Michel, would you like to go first?
So I think that we will come back on the tools because I think that we have to precise, of course, tools, because we have many tools in all companies. The problem is that difficult to compare the result of this tool between our companies. I think that the trade-off, could I say, in practice, is the investor. We are capital intensive. No, it's maybe not the case for personal intensive companies, but being capital intensive, we need money. We need money to invest. If the investor, if they don't follow us, it will be a problem. So I think that we need the investor, we need the employee on board. I think that the rest would follow. Because in practice, okay, maybe it's a little bit sad, but no many customers are asking what are the societal impact of the product. They are a little bit, I heard one of the largest consumer goods company, in a private meeting of course, saying that maximum 5 or 7% of the customers are ready to pay something above the price. So in practice, doesn't impact. The first is price, quality, and term of delivery of a product. After that, we discuss other subject. That is a pity, but it's really when you are working with the salesman of your company, they are facing this kind of problem, day-to-day problem. That's really a pity. So I think first, if they consider that we will have conscious investor and that they will give us money to invest, it will be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Michel. Hans-Ulrich.
I think I would largely echo also what was just said. I think the thing I would maybe add here is two things to, I think for the investors to start caring about this more significantly. It's again, let's say, the business case that becomes quite central. And so I do think that I think a fundamental shift will only happen if, as I said earlier, that the responsible thing is the right thing to do, because that's how you grow a successful business. So I think that is something that I see as really at the center of this, and that might mean actions on various fronts. I think but it's also not, let's say, only one area that fixes the issue. I think the whole discussion around long-term investing that has been, also the European Commission is doing some work, I think is quite important. There is also the whole discussion about reporting is relevant, to have more comparable, standardized data available. I think what I would also personally find important that, I mean, there are, when you're thinking about impacts, quite a few complexities around it. I mean, we mentioned a few, and we struggle with these every day. What I find important, to be not afraid of these complexities. We're not going to solve them in 1 or 2 years. It will be a process, but I would like to see a process that starts, that where we have the feeling it's going down the right direction, and if it's a very narrow scope in the beginning, so be it, as long as we are getting on the right path. And that, in my view, means also bringing together some of these international initiatives that are out there in the reporting arena, so to have their more global consensus on moving ahead. And I see at the moment, I think, too many national or regional attempts to fix something.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe a little bit more broadly, that this CSR, sustainability, goodness of the company, that it's very much based on the perception at the moment. It's a perception game, and I think that's probably harmful in that sense that many stakeholders might lose interest because everybody tries to look very good and green, that what is behind there. That if this type of truth would be revealed, that I think there would be a lot of appetite for that in all stakeholders, customers, investors, NGOs, talent for the companies and so on. So I think that being able to articulate that better might raise this whole topic as a more interesting one to discuss.
Okay, thank you. So we have, I think, about 10 or 15 minutes left. I'm sure there are some comments, challenges, thoughts from the floor. So I turn it open to you. Does anybody like to raise their hands and offer something or pose a question to our panel? So we have 1, 2. Okay, we'll start with 2. You first, sir.
Thank you. Piotr Magyar from the European Commission. We've seen the concept of clearinghouse launched by the former panel before the coffee break, and I see that this concept has not been picked up by you as panelists in the managerial context. So my question is whether do you see this? Do you understand this kind of concept, and do you see a role for some kind of intermediary step in generating, promulgating the information to the society? Do you rather want to communicate it yourself, or do you see any kind of mechanism that would probably assure some kind of level playing field, or maybe some kind of policy that would name and shame, or maybe apply other mechanisms that would make you maybe more aligned with what your competitors in your industry are doing?
Okay, thank you, Piotr. And then we have Johan here.
It's a bit same type of question, and it is also relating to the last point on the sheet. When you think about impact measurement by companies themselves, well, it has already been noted, it's very complex. And another issue is, of course, how independently will this impact measurement be? So if you want to communicate that this kind of impacts, how objective can we expect companies to be? So my question is that the combination of these two issues, one, the complexity, if you really think about societal impact, and second, the independency of measuring this. Does that not mean that there's an important role for intermediate organizations like rating agencies, so that they somehow develop a kind of methodology where they need indeed data from the companies, and that the main task of the companies would be to deliver those data, so that rating agencies can do a kind of analysis and then do a kind of comparison what the impacts of different companies be. And then, of course, report back and to have some consultations like that. But it seems to me that for companies themselves, this is very complex qua methodology. And second, from a societal point of view, can we really expect independent information on that?
Okay, 2 very good questions. Thank you. So I think if we boil those down to their essence, are there roles for intermediaries in terms of knowledge creation and provision to companies through something like the clearinghouse as identified in the project, and then also intermediaries in terms of assessing the information that companies provide, and if so, who and in what context? So who would like to take a first stab at answering either or both of those? Michel?
So I agree with you, because we have no credibility when we are publishing data, and it's really poor And so, for instance, in the chemical sector, we are working on an improvement of our of the definition of our metrics. So we have a process we have begun in 2010, and normally we will finish in 2015 to align, could I say, a large majority of our metrics, environmental metrics, but we will finish with the social one because maybe except the toxicity, eco and human toxicity is the most difficult to be addressed. So yes, I think that I'm not sure to understand really the concept of the clearinghouse. If it's a clearinghouse only to get information and to put that on a network, it's not important, it's not interesting, because, for instance, you can't compare the waste quantities that you are reading from a company to another. Only this example. So first we have to align the metrics. If you say that this clearinghouse or this, could I say, rating agency will develop a clear methodology and we will give answer, yes, it's nice, a nice to have. But the second point is the assessment. We are answering to different non-financial rating agencies, but they are only asking, is this figure audited? That's all. I think that if you want to have a high level of credibility, you have to have a certain assessment and to define what kind of assessment. The second point, another point, is the fact that the auditors are not trained to assess. They are assessing the process, but not the basic. I remember when we organized the first time a few years ago a beauty contest between potential candidate as auditor. I had one of a scientist, specialist in hazardous or harmful substances, and he said, oh, this guy, I could say what I want, because even if they are engineer or scientist, they are not working in depth. Huh? So you see all many things. So I am ready to say yes and yes, but we have to work. We have to work on the metrics, on the, could I say, and the path to go to, at the end, to an assessment and maybe a rating. And another problem, they have to be transparent, because certain of the rating agencies are black boxes. You don't understand why you have a score or why not. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michel. Hans Ulrich, any?
Yes, maybe on the clearinghouse. So I'm not 100% familiar with what has been proposed. I mean, I quickly read something, but I don't know whether, I don't want to claim that I fully understand it. I think if I look at it from our perspective, I think what we would very much value already would be, say, a central repository of, say, reports where certain, say, CSR type information is contained, whether it's a collection of CSR report, if it's integrated reports, but just a central place where you can find it. That would be, for us, already a good start. I think if we would have access to certain data in an electronic format, it would be also fantastic. I mean, the time we spend to collect it, I mean, it's enormous. I mean, there have been longer discussions about XBRL formatting that for financial data is at least in part available. So I think having easy access to data that is being published would be already a fantastic way forward. If we would have also more standardized data, so that it is certain metrics are standardized and easily comparable, and that this would be also then going through an audit process, I think would be also important, because we get already, if you look at the data from CDP, I mean, in the end you have to do a lot of work to work with that data. Even that data is not good enough. So I do think, for me, the focus would be on getting easy access to comparable data. I would personally forget about any kind of assessment. I mean, it is something you would have many difficulties about how you do it. Maybe at a second step or later on, But so if the clearinghouse is just an easy way to get access that is anyway somewhere out there in a more comparable format, it would be great. For the two comments on the impact measurements that you said on the complexity side, I think we are a lot more modest. Yeah? So I think already if you would have comparable data on, say, employee turnover, on health statistics, on CO2 emissions, water abstraction, already at that level, quite frankly, it doesn't exist. Well, it's a lot of work to make it comparable. And so I think for me to have their data that is standardized, comparable, that goes through some kind of auditing process, but also on the basis of some international standards, would be a big way forward. It does not mean that these impacts are reflective of the overall positive or negative impact on society, but it gives you at least something to start. And so for me, I would start small, and I think it's better than, say, nothing or what we have now. And I wouldn't worry about, let's say, the fact that it's not complete or not perfect.
Okay, we're going to have final comments from Terry, and then Regina, you want to make a comment at the end. Is that okay? So.
Yes, still about the complexity of these methodologies that kind of many times. So those ratings are anyway happening. We need to live with those and kind of transparency and dialogue between those who are making those and the companies would be very beneficial. Could this clearinghouse have a role there? I have not spent sufficiently time in understanding that concept. One example in a mobile phone case that reveals the complexity is that when people are assessing the environmental impact of the mobile phones, that it's very easy to see if you just look at the material contents of that, then the smaller and dumber phone you have, the better for the environment. But then when you take a wider look and start to look what you do with the device, it's easy to see that with a good, as an example, good camera, you might be able to live without a separate camera, and then the environmental balance of the equation is completely different. And then how to tell this story to the bigger audience has all the time been very challenging.
Thank you very much. Regina, you wanted to quickly add something, and then and Bruce as well, did you?
Question, but I don't know if you want to take another question.
Okay, well, we're at the end. We'll table it for the cocktail reception afterwards, or maybe Nigel wants to pick it up in the next session. So we'll get the question and then bring it to a close. Regina.
I wanted to explain maybe a little bit of what we mean with this idea of a clearinghouse and topic center on EU level. And I take up the comments which were made on the panel. Actually, it's exactly what you have been describing or asking for. What we found in the research at the very first sight might look a bit disappointing when we saw that if we look at CSR only, we did not see that big impact, which doesn't mean that we did, especially in the CO2 issue, we do see changes and impacts, but on other issues we don't see so much. So what we did find in the research is a lot of dedicated people and companies who would like to try and to strive for more impact orientation in their way of managing and assessing and reporting. And what we did find is a big challenge. And what we did find is also that there are ways, or that we think that there are ways which could enable better in the future to do this for companies, but also for other stakeholders, for rating agencies and for society at large. So the idea of the clearinghouse is, for once, is collecting data. The idea of the clearinghouse is also to develop methodology, not to have each single company try to strive and develop their own thing, because as it has been said, a lot of times it's complex. That doesn't mean that there will be a kind of the perfect solution and it will remain complex, but the idea is to have kind of a meeting point and also kind of a point of expertism and data collection that is available to everyone in order to come steps closer towards impact orientation when we look at corporate impacts.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, Bruce, give us your question.
As kind of a provocative question, so I hope that's going to shake things up maybe for Nigel's panel. But I think NGOs would probably argue that some companies are inherently more sustainable than others in terms of their core business and the core services they provide. And other companies are inherently less sustainable in the way that they operate or in what they do. So whereas the focus of this is on trying to measure the impacts consistently, how would be a way of dealing with that? I mean, from a European societal perspective, you would obviously want to stimulate those companies which have an inherently sustainable benefit and discourage those companies that have an inherently damaging impact on society. So how would that tie into this framework? This would be.
Okay, provocative. Thank you very much. So we're going to bring this panel to a close, and then it will take about, I think, 5 minutes to just sort of turn things around up here with refreshing water bottles and name signs for the panelists to join. So 5 minutes if you want to stand up, stretch your legs. There is, I believe, still some coffee and refreshments out back. But if you wish to get refreshments, please grab them and come right back. And we'll start the next section in 5 minutes. And in the meantime, please thank the panelists as well, Michel, Hans-Ulrich and Petteri.